right, I'm on the road, but I'm getting a chance to get this podcast put out anyway, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. I want to thank Splice.com for their support for this podcast. You can help out the podcast by checking out our special link to their system, which is splice.com/artmusictech. That's ARTMUSICTECH - music, and that'll get you a link that gives us a little bit of support. And also you can use our code, which is MUSICARTTECH, all one word, to get a free 1-month trial of their sample library offering. It's a pretty huge thing. I just got a chance to use it a little bit this week for work, and it's pretty amazing. So check out their site. It's fabulous for collaboration. Check out their sample library. It's a lot of fun to play with. And thank them for their support of this podcast with Matthew Allum. Okay, today I have the great opportunity to get to know somebody. His name's Matthew Allum. He is the mastermind behind the ALM Busy Circuits modular developments. And you'll know an ALM device because it's going to have a name that'll make you chuckle. And so that's always a good sign with a module anyway, right? And so with that short introduction, I think an awful lot of my listeners will already have a lot of questions. So let's go right into it and talk to Matthew. Hey, Matthew, how's it going?
Hi, it's going good.
Hey, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to have a chat. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you.
First of all, let's talk a little bit about your work. So you run a business. I never really know if it's ALM or if it's Busy Circuits or what the story is with the naming of this. Because even on your site, it's like you go to busycircuits.com and it says ALM. I never really know what this is. So why don't we start off by saying, what is it that called, and then talk a little bit about what you've been doing.
Okay, well, it's kind of deliberate that I use the two names, so it's sort of deliberately a little bit confusing, and nobody really knows which one to use. So originally I wanted to be just ALM, but I was a bit worried because there was a lot of other companies called ALM that were a lot bigger. So I tagged the Busy Circuits onto the end. Also, I couldn't get ALM.com.
Now
So Busy Circuits, I like the word Busy Circuits as well.
Right.
I could get the URL for that. And then, but I now own the trademark ALM for musical instruments and whatnot. So my plan was to then sort of merge to sort of move to being just ALM. But I kind of love-hate the Busy Circuits bit tagged on. I like the way that if the people aren't sure which one to use, and I'm not really sure either.
Well, it does kind of give you that kind of thing too. Like if you get cornered by somebody, or you have a customer complaining, you could say, "Oh no, that's ALM. We're Busy Circuits. It's not us." You know.
Oh, I haven't had to do that. I wouldn't.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking it's nice to have an exit strategy, right?
Yeah. I just like names when they're a little bit mixed up. Like I always used to like Compact being spelt with a Q on the end.
Right.
Which didn't, but it would like stick in your mind. You'd remember it. So there's a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. Well, naming is kind of a thing though for you too. I have questions. I have a bunch of questions just based on the names of your modules. So first of all, who is Akemie, and why do they make it onto the faceplates of a high number of your
secrets? These are trade secrets. I can't reveal the names.
That's hilarious.
No, they're references to friends or people around me, or just little silly jokes. And they're just normally mixed with something else to sound a bit silly or just sort of stick in your mind,
Sure.
and have a bit of fun as well.
Sure. I guess I was especially curious about Akemie because, you have, to me, one of like the more fascinating modules when it came out was the Akemie's Castle, which was like a full-on FM voice. And I remember at the time thinking, A, what an improbable thing to put in a module. And then B, what a great way to make it so that I would always, forever and ever remember the name of the thing, right? You could have easily called it like the FM 2014-027 or something, and it would have been forgettable. But calling it Akemie's Castle, just like, I will always remember that, right?
The whole naming convention comes from, I don't know if you remember, they're not so popular now, but you remember like the Tamiya remote control cars. I guess they were popular in the US as well. And they'd always have like somebody something. So you'd have like Vanessa's lunchbox was like the kind of, do you remember?
Right, I do now, yeah.
And I think there was like Willie's Jeep was another one.
Right, yes.
Yeah, and I always like that naming, so that's where it comes from. You know, when I can, it'll be somebody something.
Right.
But sometimes if the modules are very small, then you can't fit much on there. So then it's sort of more of a challenge.
Right, it is. Well, the module that you're probably most known for is the Pamela's workout and the follow-on, the Pamela's new workout.
Yeah.
And that was one that caught me by surprise. I've had the opportunity now to work with one for a little while, and quite frankly, I was like, oh, a clock, that's cool. Everyone needs a good clock, right?
Yeah.
And then I got it, and I started playing around with it, and it has like this deceptively small but powerful manual. And once you start digging into it, you're like, oh, Christ. There is all of these functions that I'm using a bunch of modules for now. They're kind of built in. And, oh, man, there's a whole Euclidean thing like built into this. And there's a whole LFO mechanism built in. It was surprising to me. And it went rapidly from being, oh, it's cute to have a nice clock system, to being like the place where almost all of my patches start in some way. It's an amazingly powerful thing. Now, first of all, for people who hadn't got a chance, like me, who hadn't got a chance to use the original, what's the difference between the original Pamela's workout and the new workout?
The original Pamela's workout was similar in that, it was a clock tied to a central BPM, and then you'd have 8 synchronized outputs, which would all be multiples or divisions of that core BPM. It was originally the idea, it was just there for something that could sync sort of odd sequences together. Like I had an old MFB sequencer that needed like a times 12 clock and something else. It was just started out as like that, and then I realized that I could do more with each output rather than just sort of multiply or divide them. And I think I did an alternate firmware for the first one that did the Euclidean stuff.
Okay.
And then and Pamela was like my first module, and it did a lot better than I expected, and it kind of, it's kind of like formed the company pretty much.
Right.
And then and it had been around for maybe sort of 3-4 years, and I'd had it in the back of my mind I needed to do a successor to it. So I guess the new one kind of improves on it. It's still the same thing at its core, in that you have this central BPM and then all these multiples or divisors coming out. But rather than it just outputting trigger signals, gates, it will also output LFOs sync to that clock. And then it will do a whole lot more on top of, you can adjust the phase and delay on them delays. And then you can also sort of randomly skip bits, or you can apply like Euclidean patterns, that kind of thing, as well as so there was kind of that kind of upgrade to the kind of core functionality, as well as bringing in a screen which would display a lot more information. It uses a much beefier processor. It syncs to external devices a lot better, and it has a lot more kind of parameters for these outputs you can assign to be CV controlled as well, which you couldn't really do on the original. Right. Oh, and there's expanders available for the new one, which let you like output a MIDI clock,
right,
or a DIN sync clock, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me is working with the Pamelas, I have actually, it's surprised me a number of times. And I have to admit that especially with digital modules, I'm not that used to being surprised. Most often, it's more like, well, that's exactly what I expected out of a digital thing, right? But first of all, some of the functionality, the added functionality just kind of surprised and charmed me. But there were a couple of really smart things that were done as well. I mean, one of them, first of all, despite the fact that the display is relatively small, I never feel lost and I never feel like I'm wondering what it is that I'm about to change, right? It's super clear. Yeah. And another thing I noticed is that, and this is going to sound funny, but I'm a big MPC fan, right? And I have a MPC Live, and the problem is it puts out a little bit of a goofy clock signal, which kind of, and I use a Mutable Instruments Yarns for the CV converter, which kind of isn't really happy with what the MPC Live puts out. And so then it kind of like burps out too many starts and stops, and the whole thing just gets raggedy, right? So what I kind of do is just use the clock output, and the Pamela surprised me by when it sees that the clock stops for a while, it's like, oh, you must have hit pause and you didn't, you don't have to tell me to stop, and I'm not going to freak out. And when it starts up again, it's like, okay, well, you're starting up again. Let's assume that you're going to stay at that same tempo. I mean, It was just like, it's surprising because it's not sort of like the dumb robotic kind of thing you would expect from a digital module. And that normally comes from very savvy programming. Is the programming of these things something that you do? Is it something you work with somebody else on? Who's involved in that part of it?
Oh no, it's all the programming is me.
Really?
Unfortunately, it's all me.
All right. Well, the reason I ask is, and you say unfortunately, but here's what I'll say. It's like programming done from a player's perspective rather than a programmer's perspective, right? And from the perspective of somebody who's actually going to use this stuff. I'm interested, in my podcast, I'm always interested in where people are coming from and what their backgrounds are. I'm curious what your background is and what is it that has you bringing this kind of artist-centered programming into the development of these circuits. What's your background? How did you get to doing this stuff, and what are some of those perspectives? How have they informed the way you're making modules now?
My background is software, surprisingly enough, but but it's not purely software. I have a degree in physics, so I have quite a sort of technical background, and then I worked a lot before doing this. I worked a lot with kind of embedded computers and whatnot, and a lot on the kind of UI side of things. As well as being a programmer, I've always had quite a sensitivity in terms of like usability, that kind of thing. And also, I think with kind of all the ALM modules, I guess the first customer is me. I'm literally building things to scratch itches, things that I want that I can't buy, so I'll make them. I'll be the first customer, and I like things that I can just pick up and use. I don't have to read the manual, and also I like using things that are fun and enjoyable and have a little bit of a kind of soul to them, and that's what I try and do with the modules, I guess.
Yeah, and that comes across, again, like I said, it seems like some really artist-focused stuff. Now, it's really encouraging for me to hear you say that, you're the first customer. You're doing things to scratch your own itches. What is your musical background? So you come from this very technical background, and that's what brings the tools to be able to make the modules. But there's still like this artist thing that's just really clearly a part of it as well. Where does that come from? Did you grow up as a musician? Did you come up as a musician, or is it just something that you came to in a different way?
In terms of like the music side of things, I've always enjoyed music. I was really into music when I was younger, and I guess I've always liked, as well as liking technical things, I've always liked the kind of technical side of anything sort of artistic or design based. I think what's nice about building the modules is it's nice to have the freedom to do whatever you want. you know, and not have to. You're only sort of really answering to yourself ultimately. You know, in terms of like, I really had some fun with with how the modules look. You know, in the kind of artistic side of things. You know, like I really enjoy that side of things. I don't know. Maybe it's just fluke that they turned out, you know, looking the way they do.
Why then modules and modular synths? I mean, there's a lot of different technical sides to the music game, whether it's recording gear or guitar pedals or lighting rigs. There's a lot of different ways to go. What was it about modules that drew you in?
I think what drew me into modules was, well, I think when I was younger, I always wanted a modular synth, but, you know, it was like unheard of, you know, anyone having a modular. And then sort of years later, I found out about Dotfer and whatnot, and I got a small little Dotfer system and, you know, loved it. And then looked at how the modules were put together, and, you know, I had a bit of electronics knowledge and whatnot, and had a go at making a module, which ultimately became the original Pamela, and just really enjoyed it, I think, because, you know, there was a challenge there in terms of like making something physical, which I'd never really done before. Right. And then that kind of combination of the kind of technical challenge, but also the kind of physical design and the kind of UI design, you know, like all the things I enjoy rolled into one. You know, like the idea of writing like plugins or anything like that doesn't really interest me. You know, I think it was the idea of making something physical. And also, I guess the thing with Eurorack is it was more possible, more accessible to actually make a module compared to making anything else.
Right, sure.
You know, when you compare it to sort of like, you know, if I was to go out and make like a full synthesizer or,
right.
You know, you that would be a lot tougher to do.
But it was really synthesizers were the part of like the instrument world that you liked, right?
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Was it because of artists that you loved growing up? I mean, were you a Kraftwerk guy or?
Well, I was, you know, I was into sort of house music and then and then, you know, like techno, Detroit techno, and so I'm like 43 now. Mm-hmm. But in my sort of early 20s was, you know, that would have been the early 90s was, you know, like a fantastic time for music in the UK. And I had a little studio, you know, I had an 808 and a 101 and whatnot, and would love making music with my 486 PC and sort of dreaming of the day you could do like full digital audio. But then I kind of drifted away from it all. Then, you know, I got like a heavy job that sucked up all my time and whatnot, you know.
Right.
And I think then it was only maybe I had a bit of a pause and I just sort of got back into it all again, which was really nice, you know, which was, you know, fantastic. And the technology had come on so much, not just in terms of kind of the computer technology that I was aware of, but also the hardware, you know, like I think in my early 20s, you wouldn't, you know, the internet wasn't there. You couldn't get the knowledge. You couldn't be able to make Eurorack modules. You know, you couldn't get PCBs manufactured, that kind of thing, you know. Yeah,
that's really the case. I mean, now's a good time to be wanting to get into this because sort of the infrastructure is available to be able to do it. It wasn't that long ago that coming up to somebody and saying, hey, I want 200 faceplates, they would just shrug you off because they were busy making 20,000 faceplates for some cell phone or something, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. Well, this background, though, kind of helps inform me a little bit more about kind of the modules you're making. And so, like one of them that I also, thanks to you, have been able to try out is the MUM M8. Is it a MUM or do you call it MUM?
The MUM Mate.
It's MUM Mate. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a really funky filter. And at first I was like, filter. And I tried it and it was like, And then I happened to pair it up with my braids. And something about like the digital braids and this filter just really spoke together well. And then I go and look further and, well, sure as shit, if the MUM Mate isn't based off the old Akemie S950, I think.
Yeah.
S950 filter. So it's kind of got the heritage of a digital thing, and it would make sense that the two of them would pair up in a way that would make sense to my ears. You probably at one point were an Akai sampler guy, if the time frame sounds right.
Yeah, I could never afford an Akai. I had a Roland.
But you love the idea of one anyway.
I had a W30. I had a Roland W30, which was pretty amazing at the time. Yeah. I saved up for like 2 years for it.
But the other thing is, I notice is that you have a number of, well, I'm assuming that your modules that have taiko in the name are all varieties of drum modules. And again, with that background, sort of the analog and electro-ish drum sounds would definitely be something that's kind of like pegged deep in your brain cortex, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. And, I think as well is the modules, they're just, I'm not making them just so people can make techno with them. They're not meant to be just specifically for that, I think. But there's definitely that kind of influence there because that's the kind of sound that I know well.
Yeah, right.
But I also like the idea of kind of taking these kind of classic sound sources or sound manipulation, things like the 950 filter, like with the Akemies, taking the Yamaha chip and just sort of putting that into the modular environment. Like one of the things like with the Akemies is running that through a filter just sounds amazing. With like a Yamaha FM synth, you'd never, obviously run that through a filter,
right.
And I like the idea of kind of taking them things and then putting them in this new context where you can do so much more with them, or with like the Mummate, like adding resonance to that, adding the overdrive, which weren't there on the original 950 filter. And then also having like the voltage control over all these things and the kind of fun that you can have with all that, and the kind of unexpectedness, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's neat because what it seems to have it seems to have some of the DNA of these classics without being a complete homage to them, right? Yeah,
no, definitely. I want to, take them in a different direction, hopefully, without sort of sounding too cheesy.
Well, but I think it certainly works for me, that Mummate thing, especially. I crank up first of all, I always run stuff through through an O'Toole's oscillator so that I can kind of watch what's going on, just in case. Mostly so that if I don't hear something, I can verify that it's not making noise, right? That's normally what I do. But it's hilarious to kind of watch the oscillator light up when you start pushing the resonance on that thing. It was kind of like shocking. I mean, it screams. It's not. It doesn't squeal. It screams, and it's really a lot of fun to work with. Yeah. But it is so much unlike any of the other filters that I have in my system, and that's kind of what makes it really valuable, and that's what makes it really work.
Yeah, it needs. It's kind of a strange filter in that it needs the right kind of source. You need something pretty rich harmonically, but then it sort of really does shine.
Right. There's a collaboration story behind that module, right?
Originally, I'd done a similar module called the Fizzle Guts, which used the actual chip from a FZ1 sampler.
Oh yeah.
And they have like a very strange like dual VCA filter. No one quite knows if it's analog or if it's digital. But it has a very kind of specific sound, quite distorted, and it was used in like a lot of early LFO records and I think some Aphex stuff as well. And it definitely has a very specific sound. So I had an old FZ1 that was broken and there was some info on the chip online. So I made like a little module for myself just to have a play with it. And it sounded really good. Uh-huh. So I made like a small run, like I still do make them, but I have to make them to order and I need like a donor synth and stuff, so it's not ideal at all.
Right.
But it does sound great, and I've sort of made them for friends as well and whatnot. And one of the people that had one was Jack artist Mum Dance, okay. And he's a big fan of like early samplers and whatnot as well. And he was saying, "Oh, you should do like a 950 filter." And I was thinking, and I thought that I always assumed that a 950 had a digital filter in it.
Right.
And I was thinking, no, you can't do that. And he said, no, I'm sure I'm sure it's not digital. I'm sure it's analog. So I checked out the schematics and whatnot and did a bit of research and realized and discovered that it was in fact analog. although it's not purely analog. It's an analog filter with digital control. It's kind of controlled by switching a capacitor on and off really, really fast.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it
has to be like digitally controlled. Yeah.
You control it by basically changing the clock speed.
Okay.
And that changes the filter cutoff.
Sure. Okay.
But the circuitry was, possible to. It didn't require any weird chips that I couldn't get anymore or anything like that. So I developed so it became the mum mate, and it basically went back and forth with Jack, iterations, and added the resonance and whatnot. And then we had some fun. We did like a fun little promo video for it and stuff, which was good.
At what point, one of the things I would say is the stuff that you do, even when it is sort of informed by something like, in this case, the Akemie filter. There's clearly a point at which you just say, okay, I'm going to diverge from the original. In this case, definitely pushing the resonance, but also building in a kind of neat VCA that really can get pretty growly pretty easy. These are things that are real differentiations. What for you, or like in this case, especially when you're working with someone else who might have a very specific sense of what they want the filter to sound like, how do you make the decisions of where you have to stay true to the original and where you're free to go off on your own?
To be honest, I didn't get too kind of scientific about keeping it close to the original, but beyond sort of A and Bing it with the resonance off. Like, it does sound very similar, and I checked it on a scope and whatnot, and it does sound very, very similar, and it should do because the circuitry is very similar. I think I just wanted to add the resonance because, I felt it was missing. It's nice to add. It wasn't too difficult to add. I added the real kind of screaming resonance because I just like that kind of resonance filters. Okay. Which it doesn't, where you kind of go beyond the kind of squelchiness, like with sort of early Roland SH synths do it, where they have the real kind of like out of control resonance, and then I think later sort of synths backed away from it, So I just like that kind of thing. You just can get more out of it, and then adding the kind of subtle overdrive. I think that was a bit as well because Jack really likes using that with the SBG. I do a module called the SBG, which allows you to hook up like guitar pedals to the modular. Mm-hmm. It sort of does the levels and a little sort of wet dry control. Okay. But you can self patch the module and it becomes like a distortion. And Jack really liked that distortion, so I thought, well, let's add a little bit of that into the filter as well.
I see. Okay. One of the things that I haven't really asked this of anyone else that has been a modular builder, but I'm going to ask you because you talk very much about your love of modular systems and that you're your own customer. I think a lot of people imagine that if you have access to as many of your modules as you want, that you're going to have a modular system as big as a boat, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what does your personal modular system look like?
Well, it's as big as a boat in pieces. It's always in bits.
Why is that?
Oh, well, because I'm always changing it around, and I think when you're a modular manufacturer, you have the ability to trade with other manufacturers and whatnot.
Right.
As well as having your own modules and not. So it's pretty easy to build up quite a big system. But on the flip side of that is, do you ever get the time to really use it? Not really. I think that's the kind of downside is it's never quite set up how I want it. It's always in a constant state of flux.
Yeah, sure. I have to say, especially with your lineup, it would be really hard for me not to have like something like a TR-707 with all those triggers like firing off like 15 of the taiko drum things just because I could, it seems like
definitely. And I've done things like that before. Like I've hooked up 4 Akemie's castles and had it going like fully polyphonically and done like a shepherd's tone with it, with four of them and things like that.
Do you video those things? You really ought to video.
Yeah,
those
I
things.
think I think because when I did the shepherd's tone, it was one of the tests I did when I was developing the new Pamela, because I could use the LFOs, to do like the ramps for the shepherd's tone, and I think that was on my Instagram. Like I put things like that.
I see, sure.
On my Instagram, and I do. It's always nice when you can get like more than one of the same oscillator together.
Right.
Which I guess is the luxury of being a manufacturer, is that's kind of easier to do.
Well, and again, it's kind of like telling that your DNA is part of this, because all of a sudden the ramps with all the offsets and stuff in the Pamelas, it makes perfect sense. It was what you had to do to make the shepherd tone of your dreams, right?
Yeah. I think I'll put that on my Instagram, but also as well as, I think the best thing is like friends and whatnot use my modules and they make them do things, and I think, how the hell are they making it sound like that?
Right.
Or you hear things and then you think, oh, that sounds really good, and then you realize that it's one of your modules.
How often do you get word back from people, maybe people that you really respect, that are just like, oh, I really like what you're doing? I mean, I'm glad to be able to do it, but I think that there's a whole, there's definitely constellations of people that are important to you. Do you get to hear back from them?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Through friends, and you always get occasionally you get a random email from someone you really respect, and that's always really nice. I sort of think my sort of 18, 19-year-old self would be
be tripping, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, God, I wish I was still like 19, 20, but unfortunately not. And then also at like I do Super Booth. I did like Machines in Music, so you meet a lot of people there, and there's sort of some more local ones like in the UK, in Brighton and whatnot. So you meet a lot of customers there, and chat to people.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I always like talking to builders about, especially people who are focused on hardware, is something. I'm a software guy. The nice thing about being a software guy is if you really cock something up, you can just tell people, hey, I just put an update on the website. Can you go take care of that? With hardware, you don't often have that opportunity. And, we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of manufacturers really taking a beating or leaving the scene entirely because of problems with modules that they put out. How much is that something that is kind of concerns you, might be under your skin, and what are the things you do to prevent yourself from really putting a stinker out there?
That is one of the biggest concerns for me. It is like a massive concern and worry, and it's horrible when I release a new module, that sort of worry that I have that I've missed something, or something's wrong with it. Like, I guess there's kind of two ways around it. One way is you have like with the Pamela, it's fairly easy to upgrade it. It has the little USB port on the side. So if there was kind of like a kind of firmware problem, then that could be fixed with an update. In terms of the hardware, it really comes down to testing and loads of testing, be that in development, beta testing. Like I've got a couple of things in development now that I'll make sort of small runs of, give to friends and then get feedback, but it's still really tough, and then being happy with it. And then you've got the actual manufacturing of it and something going wrong there. So I'll normally do like a test manufacturing run, and work with my factory do a lot of my testing. So I'll work with them on getting a really sort of solid test plan together. You still get the occasional fail, from a fail component or something, right, that slips through, but it's generally quite rare. But in terms of something kind of like catastrophic happening, I don't know. The other thing is when I do an initial run, is I keep the initial run small just in case something like that does happen.
Yeah, I was wondering if that wasn't one of the stop gaps you do, is instead of like fulfilling the whole pipeline with your first hit, if you don't do a really small run, go ahead and pay the high price to do it, per unit price, but just so that if it is a problem, it doesn't break the bank.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's something I've done. Like I've always done sort of pretty small initial runs. I think the pain is there though, is if the module proves to be a hit, then you get flack from the other way, and
Yeah,
in that
right.
no one can get it, and it's not necessarily from people, it would be from the stores and whatnot, wanting to get more stock, and it's quite difficult kind of finding the sweet spot.
Yeah, I get that, and I think that that being a hardware developer, I just think that there is sort of like a real added stress about putting something out in the world and then realizing what it takes if something went wrong. I have to admit that as a software guy, I am often thankful that my mistakes are generally temporary.
Yeah, but I think on the kind of flip side is, I think software is a lot more temporary generally anyway. I think that's what I like about making something physical, is it will potentially exist forever. You can't delete it. Someone could be using my modules in like 50 years time.
That's a great point, because not only could they be using them, but they might still be satisfied with it from 50 years from now.
Yeah.
That's the one
Yeah.
thing you can say about software. 2 years from now, nobody's going to be satisfied with what you did. It's going to it's going to be old, right? And that's the downside to software, is it's sort of disposable.
Not that, like, I guess, modules are disposable to a degree as well, but it's, what I mean. There's definitely, it's what drew me to doing it originally was, the kind of excitement of doing something, of creating something actually physical.
Right.
And although it does bring them kind of extra risks, that you get like a slightly bigger sense of sort of fulfillment.
Well, the other thing I would say about hardware is you can actually get away with doing a smaller and maybe more focused thing really well, which in software, if you do a small focused thing, everyone's like, you did a small thing,
Yeah. And, I think as well is I sort of, it's like I was saying earlier about how, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it would have been impossible to do this. It's really,
Right.
I sort of realized that, and it was something that I wanted to sort of play with. There was a sort of challenge there, in kind of trying it out. And I think originally I'm sort of having to adjust a lot of the way I'm thinking about things, because originally I never sort of set out to sort of start a company. Originally it was just a kind of a bit of fun and a kind of a technical challenge as much as anything, and maybe an artistic project as well. And now it is kind of a full-time job. I do it 24/7 now.
Yeah, right. Sounds like more than full-time then, right?
Yeah. I think the market is really growing. I did definitely get a sense of growth. Because it amazes me even how big the modular market is now, considering how expensive all the stuff is.
Right, but conversely, I would say, one of the things that I hear a lot is like, oh, it's a bubble and it's going to go away. But I would point to another similar market that maybe is kind of showing us what the future looks like. In the recording side, if you look at the 500 series, like modular processors, that became the way that you built a compact studio, but it's ubiquitous, right? There's a lot of people doing it, and there are some major players that have gone in there, but there are still a lot of mom and pop shops doing great modules, 500 series modules for that. And it's become the ecosystem that's intrinsic to the recording studio.
Yeah.
It seems to me the modular is kind of becoming that for synthesizers too, or at least it feels that way to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think as well, like, obviously I have concerns about it being a bubble or whatnot, but then I think what's going to replace it,
Right.
And it is so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
It is the most fun way to make music, I think, anyway. I don't know. I think it's becoming a lot tougher for new companies now, because there is so much out there. It is so saturated. And I think maybe you're seeing from the like bigger companies maybe a slowing down in them releasing new modules so much.
Right. No, I think though that there's always going to be an opportunity for any size company if a good idea comes along. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's becoming harder to come up with the good ideas, and to come up with something new and different. But in a way, that kind of makes it more exciting anyway. The sort of higher the bar gets.
I would get slapped down if I didn't try at least to ask you the next question, which is, what do you have on the bench that you're working on now?
Oh, so right now, as I have the stuff that I showed at Super Booth.
Okay.
Which is the Quade Megaslope, which is a 5-stage envelope, LFO, and sequencer, which should be out very soon. I have a tiny, well, not that tiny, 6 HP little digital oscillator, which I'm kind of trying to get to gold at the moment so it can go into production, but I'm not quite happy with it yet. And then the biggie, which I really need to get finished, is a sampler with eight output sampler, which takes some of the ideas of Pamela, kind of UI wise, and puts them into a 8 output sampler. No, sorry, 8 inputs, 4 outputs. It's kind of at that stage where it's kind of 80% done, but the last 20% is going to take 80% of the work. I've got all the horrible sloggy stuff to finish, and I haven't touched it for about 6 weeks. So
oh no,
I've really got to I just need to get a little bit of motivation, but that's kind of next on my to-do list.
Sure.
There's a lot of I have a few other random bits and pieces that are floating around that are in various states. I'm trying to get a case done because I'd like to do like a small complete system, which is something that I'm working on with these grey panels that I showed at Super Booth. I want to do a little system that will contain the sampler, but I don't think any of this now will happen till early next year. And and also I'm about to move into a new office, and I need to sort all that out because I need some more space and whatnot.
Unreal. Well, that's great. It sounds like you have a lot of work to do, but it also sounds like you drive yourself pretty hard. What do you do to unwind? What do you do to not look at modules?
Well, I hang out with my family, have 2 daughters, so I enjoy annoying them. I'm a keen runner. I like running, so I run sort of 4 or 5 times a week. Rack up a bit of distance. I find that very relaxing. Listening to podcasts. And then obviously kind of just usual things. I like just the usual sort of computer games, that arcade machines, that kind of thing. Just usual sort of like geeky stuff that I don't really get to spend enough time on as I'd like to.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Believe me. It's funny. Lately, I got one of these mono Norns devices. I'm having no more fun than when I'm trying to figure out how to make Lua do something so I can have it make a squeaky noise, just because it's a technology tweak, right? And then I'll flip from that to some handheld stupid game. It's all these things. They kind of seem to trigger the same kind of synapses, all of which make me happy.
Yeah. I just love sort of old technology, not sort of really old, but sort of 90s technology, that sort of thing. I like, as much as I like iPhones and the kind of modern tech, I find it depressing the way they're sort of these just boring black slabs. They've sort of lost all. They don't have a soul anymore. When sort of in the 90s, all the sort of stuff that Sony were doing, and really sort of interesting, sort of visually.
Yeah, well, my son and I bought one of those Nintendo Classics. And if that didn't charm the pants off me, and it's like, if you don't know, you'll look at it and be like, oh my God, that's the worst graphics I've ever seen in your life. And my argument would be, those are the best graphics you're going to ever see in your life, frankly.
No, I got loads of old Nintendo stuff and whatnot, and my daughters hate it. They're like, what is this? What is this crap?
I hear it. Well, Matthew, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and having a discussion. It's great talking to you. It's great hearing the stories behind the things you're making. the stories behind the names of what you were making, which I had to tell you, I just needed to know the story, and it makes a lot of sense now. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for the opportunity of letting me try out some of your modules as well. It's been a real,
thank you.
It's been a real treat and a real education for me. So with that, I'm going to let you have the rest of your day. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and we will talk again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Matthew for hanging out and having a chat about the development of his modules, the development of his business, and just where he was coming from. A lot of interesting stuff there. If you haven't had a chance to check out his work, you should head on over to busycircuits.com. You'll get a chance to see all of the modules that he has available. There's some really interesting stuff there. I've become a big fan. I want to thank all my friends out there, the folks at Synthtopia, folks at Cycling and at Ableton, and especially the folks at Splice.com who are helping support this podcast. Again, if you have an opportunity, you could head on over to Splice.com. Our special link is splice.com/artmusictech-music. Head on over there and take a peek. Try out their sample library using our code MUSICARTTECH to get a free month of their sample library. Just have fun. Collaboration's a cool thing. Get in it. All right, with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Have a good one.